This week, Venus is going to be our central storyteller in our skies. She'll be ingressing Taurus and returning to her own domicile, her own temple. So she's reclaiming dignity, embodiment, value, and desire. Then the full moon in Libra, her other domicile, her other temple, throws Venusian themes into full visibility. So we have that love, balance, reciprocity, beauty, and that question of what's truly worth preserving. And just as Venus is coming home to herself, she's meeting Pluto by square. So that atmosphere will deepen. And what begins as her return to pleasure and self-worth quickly becomes a confrontation with power, obsession, shadow, and transformation. So it's not a soft Venus week. This is Venus being tested. It's like Beauty and the Beast. Beauty meets the Beast. And something that we seeded back in January at the beginning of the Venus-Pluto synodic cycle is now reaching its first major turning point at this square. Hello, Karen Sullivan here, Soul Symbols Astrology, and you're all really welcome here. It's good to have you here. So for the astrology this week, beginning on the 30th of March and moving on into beautiful April, I want to have a look at Venus, but not Venus in a kind of superficial romance, decorative, attractive Venus. I want to look at the deeper principles there. So Venus is the force that's drawing life together. Venus's value, beauty, cohesion, desire, attraction, relationship, and that sensuality that comes with her being in Taurus. And what we are really willing to cherish and tend and preserve and devote ourselves to. So Venus can tell us or show us, the archetype of Venus, what is precious. She can show us what we're feeding with our attention. She can also highlight what we're magnetized towards, and our understanding of beauty, what's worthy, and how we define love. And this week, Venus is moving through a really powerful arc. She's entering Taurus, so that's her temple. It's her domicile, and she's regaining dignity from where she's been in Aries in her fall. So she's going to acquire that steadiness and embodiment. And then we move towards the full moon in Libra, and this is Venus's other temple. So that emotional and relational field is illuminated like a mirror being held up to Venus herself. And just as she's coming into her domicile and full moon in domicile, into her own strength, she's going to meet Pluto by square, and that whole atmosphere will deepen. So you might find this week desires getting more intense and seeing that the stakes are higher. Questions can be much sharper for us about what we value and what is the hidden power dynamic underneath our attractions, our attachments, our longings and bonds. So we could look at it as beauty, the beauty of Venus meeting the underworld of Pluto, and what is happening when the wish for peace meets the demand for truth. I want to frame this archetypally because it's not just a transit about nice things or difficult things. It's a week about the testing of Venus and the deepening of the archetypal significations of Venus. And then we're going to be asked about whether those values can hold under pressure. So let's have a look at the charts, and let's have a look at Venus entering Taurus. So here she is entering Taurus. She pops in on the 31st, so that's on the Tuesday. And then if you see here, the sun in Aries, and the moon up there in Libra, which is Venus's other domicile, and the full moon. So we have the full moon here, a Venusian full moon, and then we go on, and on the 4th of April, which is a Saturday, the end of the week, she's at 5 degrees Taurus here, and she is coming into that square with Pluto. And I will show you where this synodic cycle started right back in January. And I'll talk a bit more about that later, but where is she? I'm losing it here. Right. So here we have Venus meeting with Pluto. Also, what we have here is a a new moon in Capricorn. So she is between that new moon in Capricorn and Pluto here, as she then makes her conjunction with Pluto. She also had her synodic cycle, the Cazimi with the sun that week. Right, let's get you back. So there's something immediately restorative about this ingress. Venus is returning to her own sign. And so there's that sense of coming back into her own body, her own rhythm, her own terrain. Taurus is earthy, it's fertile and receptive. You get a lot of sensuality with Taurus. It's rooted, patient, or as some call it, stubborn. So Taurus isn't in a rush here. It's a fixed earth sign, and also not after unnecessary complications. There's a sense of Taurus wanting to find what's real, and what he can touch, what he can cultivate, the earth, the ground, and what can be sustaining. So he's looking for texture and substance and continuity, and the life within that. So when Venus enters Taurus, there is, at least potentially, that exhale, because she's just come out of Mars ruled Aries. So it's a return to appetite and instinct, and to our body's intelligent. And also it's a return to a kind of simplicity, a deep honesty. And Venus in Taurus knows value. So there's a sense of what is valuable here, what is being lived, what can nourish us here. And it's in the environment we create, what we repeatedly choose. So we're looking at how we spend our time, our money, our energy, our care, and really what we refuse to trade ourselves away for. So it's a lot about comfort here, and stability. So Venus in Taurus, she brings that feeling that peace isn't about passivity. It's not about being passive and doing nothing. Okay. And the sense of beauty not being superficial. So it's about cherishing something, almost like a moral act as much as an essential one. So our relationships, our environment. And Venus in Taurus is sort of saying to us, understand what feeds life and what's got worth, what it is that supports me, and what's allowing our love of whatever it is, a relationship, a person, or our environment, to grow roots, to get bedded into that stability. So Venus is arriving in Taurus. It does bring a sense of lounging in comfort here. It is beauty. It's that Empress energy here in Taurus, but she's arriving in strength. Okay, her dignity is not incidental here. It's part of this whole week's story. So she enters Taurus and gathers herself, recovers her center, feels the ground beneath her feet, because she's moving towards Pluto. So that is pretty testing. When any planet comes towards Pluto, there's a test in there, there's a depth there. So right from the beginning of the week, I'd say the deeper image is not only Venus enjoying Taurus, it's Venus reclaiming her substance so that she can endure a descent without losing herself here. So Venus is bringing not only pleasure here, but a coherence. She's bringing desperate things into harmony, and allowing life to become inhabitable. That's her kind of thrust within Taurus. So she can be teaching us to create a world that we love living in and that's worth living in. So that can be through our art, affection, values, how we treat our bodies and our money. You know, what are we doing with our money? How do we value it? And definitely through our treatment of nature. If you do think of that, the Empress card, you know, she sat there surrounded by the beauty of nature. And it's through our treatment of one another as well. So Venus is telling us here in Taurus what kind of world we're making and what we're drawn to, and also what we may be neglecting. So already with this ingress into Taurus, we're in a conversation about grounded value and embodiment and the right use of our desires. So we're looking towards things that support life, but also where the leakage is, where it drains life and energy. And also about whether we're living in a way that is sensually and ethically coherent. So she arrives with all this architecture of archetypes around her. And then comes the full moon in Libra, which is beautiful symbolically because, as I said, it's Venus's other domicile. So she's just entered Taurus, one of her homes, and now the moon becomes full in Libra, her other home. So the whole sky almost feels Venusian. She's strong in her domicile and she's mirrored back to herself through the lunar field at this full moon. And that's going to make the full moon feel like a revelation of Venus, a reflection, you know, a revelation of our relationships, balance, reciprocity, fairness, proportion, harmony, aesthetic truth, and emotional equilibrium. So if Taurus is the side of Venus that's asking us about what we value and nourish, you know, what nourishes us, feels real, that can actually be built and preserved, then Libra is asking us how we share that value, what that balance looks like relationally, and where that reciprocity is, justice. She may be asking questions about has politeness, our need for politeness, replace the truth, and harmony just being just a mere image to us, imaginal, and what we're maintaining at too high a cost. So looking at the reality of where the exchange is beautiful and where it is appearing beautiful. So looking for that facade there. The moon will be, it's a full flower. It will be displaying and reflecting. So the full moon is very illuminating for us here in Libra. It shows us what's ripened, what's visible, and what can no longer remain latent. So in Libra, what becomes visible is often something about the relational atmosphere, because Venus has a lot to do with relationship and the way the energy is moving between us and other people, and any imbalances that we've normalized, and our charm concealing strain. So it also looks at things. Libra can be kind of people pleasing sometimes for the sake of harmony. So where has that peace or harmony existed? But it depends on our silence. Okay, it's that longing of fairness where there's been compromise without true reciprocity. So we're looking for a cohesion and a balance and harmony with those things. So this part of the week is likely to bring us insight, this full moon, and emotional clarity. We might get insight to where something's out of proportion for us, or we're overgiving, or too much is being withheld, or where desire and agreement aren't aligned. Okay, and aesthetic harmony has been substituted for deeper honesty, because harmony is lovely, but if it's not honest and there's no reciprocity there, is it truly harmony? I would say. But it can also, this full moon, reveal something beautiful in a truer sense. It can show us where grace is present and love's alive. It can show where beauty is a real force of balance and healing, and what's worth repairing or protecting or honouring, and worth bringing back into right proportion. So Venus is the revealer of imbalance, but she's also the restorer of harmony. So this is beautiful full moon energy. But at the same time, we still got to keep this larger sequence in mind, because the full moon is happening with Venus already applying towards Pluto. So we can look at the full moon like the mirror stage. It's revealing and showing us something. We're seeing something. But what it shows can't remain only at a level of social agreement or aesthetic arrangement. It's immediately being drawn into something deeper, and that revelation is going to be tested. I'm talking about here the Venus Pluto synodic cycle, because it gives the whole week that depth and continuity, and it is part of Venus's journey here. The square is, it's not happening in isolation. It's not just a square. It belongs to that larger cycle that began back in January that I showed you earlier. And Venus came together with Pluto around the Capricorn Aquarius threshold. So Venus was already just out of sign. She'd just ingressed into Aquarius, while the new moon was still late in Capricorn. I think there were 2 degrees there. And it's really important, this. The seed of the cycle was being planted at a threshold. I done a video on the Capricorn threshold moon, I believe. So that's like a border crossing, that liminal space, one sign ending it and one beginning. That new moon was also at the anaretic degree of Capricorn. So it's the old order dissolving and that other pattern starting to form in Aquarius. Okay. Yeah, check out that video. Goes into detail about that. And all of it is under that dark moon, that new moon in the subterranean atmosphere of beginnings where they're not visible as yet. So we could look at it like that Venus-Pluto synodic cycle began in the darkness, not in broad daylight here. So we weren't in a Venusian garden like Taurus. We were in the threshold between Capricorn and Aquarius. So it means that from the very beginning, this cycle has carried both Capricorn and Aquarius in its bones, in that sense. So Capricorn is speaking of structure. It's ruled by Saturn. Structure, order, consequence, realism, form, authority. It's that real hard edge of reality, the architecture of the material, the known world. And Aquarius, also ruled by Saturn, but it is speaking about the collective systems, future patterning, abstraction, ideology, it's air, social reconfiguration. It's that wider field that exceeds the personal. And there between those two territories is where Venus met Pluto. So I would say in January, something began to shift tectonically in the Venusian sphere, in love, desire, value, relationship, resources, attractions, in the aesthetics of life. And also what we were magnetized towards and our sense of beauty that we want to preserve here. So Venus meeting Pluto at this point where the moon hasn't even come out and slither as yet suggests that a new seed was planted kind of in underworld territory. So that seed of transformation would have taken time to reveal itself. So it's a seed around that deep restructuring of desire and value, because that new moon, although Venus was just out of sign, was in conjunction technically with it. So this week we reach that opening square of the cycle, and Pluto is in the superior square. So he's kind of pressing down on Venus here. So in any synodic cycle, the conjunction is the seed of that cycle. That opening square is the first point, crisis point, the first point where we might find friction, or where that seed has to encounter reality and take form. So there's often resistance here, and a sense of proving whether it can live in the world, not only in potential. Seeds die under the soil and never sprout above. We're talking about that sprout that's just coming up if we look at it in the moon cycle that way. So whatever began in January, cast your mind back there. Whatever was planted around Venus and Pluto then, it's this week that it's going to meet its first real test. And it's important too that this is that opening square, as I said, with Pluto in the superior position, because it's overcoming Venus from Aquarius. So the Plutonian demand comes from above or from a wider field, from a deeper invisible patterning that Venus can't ignore. It's pushing down on her. She's strong now, Venus. She's in Taurus, and she's got dignity here. And she also has that substance. But Pluto in that superior square means the deeper pressure is still Plutonian, pushing down. This aspect is asking more of Venus than Venus might want to give right now. So it's pushing, Pluto is pushing towards exposure, truth, descent, transformation, and intensity, compulsion, the revelation of what's lying beneath these Venusian attributes. So this week, we could think of Venus going into Taurus and remembering the truth of herself here, because she's in her temple. And then that full moon in Libra is showing her the field, the reflection. And then Pluto is asking what the January seed really meant, what was actually initiated back then, what hidden process in love, in value, self-worth, desire, intimacy, power, what is needing to be faced here. So it's a good time to go back mid-January and have a look what was unfolding with all those Venus things that I've spoken about, love, value, etc. So this Venus square Pluto can be incredibly charged because it's touching desires. Venus is about desire at depth. Venus is a attraction, yes, but we got Pluto here intensifying whatever he touches. So it's not an energetic, it's not an archetype that's surface. He's Lord of the underworld. So he's not interested in the outward decoration of Venus. He's pulling downward. He's pulling us downward, inward, beneath the visible. So when Venus and Pluto are at a tense, it's a square, and a square is of the nature of Mars. It's a tense aspect. We often experience love, attraction, beauty, longing, relationship as something that's far more serious than usual. Something potent, transformative, can be destabilizing. But it can also be something that can renew and regenerate, but only through passing through truth. That's what Pluto is doing here. So at its highest expression, this aspect can bring us deep and intense passion. It can bring the experience of love as a renewing force, a force that regenerates the psyche, our souls, that's going to strip away falseness and can awaken like more a deeply profound intimacy. So it can bring the drive to unite, with your lover or the people that you love. So not merely on a social or sentimental level, but at a soul level. So it can reveal a bond that is capable of surviving dissent, shadow, and honesty here. It's not a superficial transit. There's something in Venus Pluto that knows love is not just about sweetness, roses and chocolates and nice things. Okay, it's an initiation. It can be a death and rebirth process, or the burning away of what's false, so that something within our relationships, that's real, can emerge out that. Time for honesty, people. Rem Butler describes Pluto and Venus as Beauty and the Beast, and it's really useful because Venus being the beauty, that beauty of harmony, grace, proportion, sensual life, that flowering of value and just pure radiance that comes when something is in right relation. And then we can look at Pluto as the beast, that underworld power, the primal, hidden, instinctive, subterranean force. So he holds Pluto often what's been exiled, taboo, feared, or buried. Okay, so we can have some interesting times in the bedroom really, right now. So when Venus is square Pluto, that the beauty of her is confronted by that beast. So it's a descent into relation with it, to see what lies underneath the attraction and what power has been shaping desire. And really, it's almost like a test whether the beauty can survive contact with the underworld and return with greater truth. And it is as it sounds, it's not gentle. It's the shadow side of Venus and Pluto is really real. So it can bring obsessive attractions, jealousy, possessiveness, fear of loss. It can bring impulses, or it can reveal impulses to control and to test or to manipulate. It can also bring that passive aggression, hidden motives, power struggles, emotional pressure. We can have love here mixed with fear. You know, we can have that fear of loss or being overwhelmed. And intensity here can be mistaken for intimacy, or desire can really be used as leverage. Hence why, you know, the manipulation can be rife here. It can reveal the places where we want not simply to love, but to own. Okay. And that desire to unite can be a desire to dominate, and to hold power through desirability. There are some dark shadows to Pluto and Venus. It can also reveal a love of power itself, and that's a really important nuance. Sometimes it's not only about that relational possessiveness, it's about how beauty, charm, status, aesthetics, money, sensuality, desirability are used in the service of power. Okay, we can see this in the media a lot. This is Pluto Venus, where that beauty is held out there as something to be that we need to buy products for. And so we need to look at, what do we find beautiful because it's true, or is it beautiful because it's coming in kind of in a manipulative way, exerting force, prestige, fascination, or control? So we may be asking ourselves questions of where we are seduced by power, and then we're calling it love. Okay. Or being drawn to intensity because we feel chosen and significant or safe. And it can also highlight where our attractions are entangled with fear. So not small questions, people, but it's not a small aspect. And again, what protects the chart from collapsing into that pure Plutonian distortion is the dignity of Venus and Taurus. She's not weak. She knows herself more clearly than she did at the conjunction in January. So if you look back with those themes, did themes arise there? You know, contrast the two. Here, she's got roots and body and the instinct of self-possession. She's knowing the difference between hunger and nourishment, and between that devotion and where she's depleted. And she'll also understand the difference between what feels luxurious and what is sustaining life. So Venus in Taurus can meet Pluto without surrendering her center, that essence of who she is. She can say, I'm not going to betray what's valuable, even under pressure. Neither will I confuse obsession with love. And you can say the same for, you know, confusing intensity with truth. So it's a case of not abandoning the body's wisdom in pursuit of emotional drama, or allowing fear to define your worth. So having that surrender to the descent, but descending with yourself rooted. This is where the opening square of the cycle becomes really meaningful. It is the fact of that synodic cycle beginning back in January and asking us now to be embodied differently. So maybe back in January, there's that beginning of a new awareness around desire and power. Perhaps something was seeded around who or what you were magnetized towards, or something shifted around your sense of self-worth, relational truth, money, beauty, what you were prepared to call love. And now you're at a point where the question's more than theoretical. It's becoming practical, material, felt. Okay. And maybe it's testing you in many ways. You maybe now will be looking at what new truth costs and what comfort has got to be changed here. It might even be a habit that you need to break, or a pattern that's not sustainable if that seed is to grow in an honest way. Because the opening square always introduces friction, and friction, friction. If we think about Venus and the oyster, it's friction of the sand causes a pearl. So it's not a failure, it's part of incarnation. It is that point where the soul of the cycle meets the matter. So it can feel intense this week, but don't think anything's gone wrong if it does. It might mean that what was initiated is now becoming real enough to challenge your old arrangement, your old way of thinking, of being, of doing. And I think collectively this will be felt as well. Venus in Taurus is speaking to material value, the body, the earth, food, money, land, pleasure, craft, beauty. It's what makes life sensually and materially livable. So Pluto in Aquarius was speaking to collective systems, social engineering, ideological pressure, networks, technological structures, and those future making forces that can reshape society from behind the scenes. Okay. So there's a broader tension here between embodied human values and abstract systems of power. So it that tension can be between what nourishes life and what reorganizes life according to larger impersonal designs. Venus is asking what supports life, and Pluto is asking who's holding the power over value, or shaping desire, or setting the terms of worth. Very important things to look at this week. So even if you experience this very personally, there's something much larger humming in the background. But at the personal level, I would say this week is asking for extraordinary honesty. So that honesty about what you want, what you fear losing, where you're attached, where you're manipulating rather than revealing, where there may be jealousy or possessiveness that is pointing to a deeper insecurity. But also honesty about where peace has been maintained through silence, or where passion is real and life-giving, or where it's entangled with control. So this can be very freeing, difficult but freeing. So if you find yourself stirred by deep feelings this week, it's not necessarily a problem. We've got Venus, Pluto stirring up that deep feeling. So the questions about what you do with it, are you going to grip on harder or seek reassurance through control? Are we going to test, withdraw, punish, seduce, maneuver? Or are we asking, what is the fear underneath this? Or what is the deeper value that needs to be protected? We could also look at what it is in us that needs to die so that love can become less controlling, less afraid, less strategic, and more real. Because that's the alchemical possibility here. It's not that denial of passion, it's about purification and deepening, and that refusal to let power corrupt love. So beauty meets the beast. Yep, but beauty's not there simply to tame the beast or be devoured by it. Beauty's there to descend and see, know, and return transformed. And the beast too is not only monstrous. Pluto contains the buried vitality, the instinct, that primal raw truth, the regenerative force that polite Venus, she avoids. So the meeting can be fruitful provided we don't romanticize distortion here. And that is why I keep coming back to Venus in Taurus. That's our medicine. She's going to remind us to slow down here in Taurus, to inhabit our bodies. Our bodies can tell us so much, and to trust that over fantasy, to honor our senses, to return to the things that actually nourish us and what is life-giving over what is just compelling or seductive. Okay, to distinguish between being consumed and being deeply met. So the arc of this week taken together is pretty elegant, I think. Venus is entering Taurus, coming home to ourselves, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming embodiment, and the right to value what is simple, real, sustaining, and beautiful. Then we have the full moon in Libra that is going to reflect Venus back to herself through the relational mirror. So illuminating the field of fairness, balance, reciprocity, and harmony, showing us where equilibrium may have been lost and where something beautiful needs restoring, where emotional and relational atmosphere is either truly graceful or it's just appearing to be like that. It's that honesty. And then after this, we have Pluto squaring Venus, opening up the first crisis point in that larger synodic cycle seeded in January. The deeper forces, but underneath love, desire, value, attraction, and the power come forward here. So the question is not just about what's beautiful, but it's about what is true, what is shaping our desires, and how does the harmony survive contact with shadow. And perhaps the deepest invitation of the week is to come home to yourself first. Let that full moon show you what's out of balance. And when Pluto intensifies the field, answer from your rootedness, not out of a compulsion, okay? Answer from your values rather than your fear, from truth and not strategically answering. Let that January seed show you what's trying to grow. Go back in your journals if you journal, or just try and remember. But whatever is growing, don't feed it with obsession. Feed it with honesty and embodiment and self-respect, and with that kind of love that can descend and return more whole, honest love. So it's Venus being tested, but Venus also becoming more powerful in the right sense. So not that power through control, possession, but power through integrity and knowing what's precious and refusing to betray it. So power through allowing desire to be transformed rather than weaponized, and through letting beauty become deep enough. So as you move through this week, the question is not only what do I want, but it's about what you value enough to remain faithful to when desire becomes intense. So questions you could ask is, what kind of love do I want to cultivate? And what kind of beauty do I want to serve? Where has power distorted tenderness? And where has fear distorted intimacy? What hidden pattern began to move in January that is now asking to be lived differently? You could be asking, what must change in you so that love becomes less possessive, manipulative, afraid, and more real? Venus enters Taurus and remembers the sacredness of what can be held, tended, nourished, and cherished. I go back to the Empress in that garden. There's water flowing, there's corn growing, it's abundant. Okay, so what do we want to nourish and cherish that will be, bring us that kind of abundance inside and out? The full moon in Libra will reveal where that balance and reciprocity and beauty need restoring. And Pluto from Aquarius is pressing deeper questions here, about whether our values can hold under that pressure and love survive truth. They might be difficult truths. And can our desires be purified of fear? I mean, that's complex and intense to even look at. So it's that, can we descend into the underworld and return with more soul? So that's the work of this week. We've got the attraction and pleasure and love, but it's under pressure. We got beauty meeting the beast. So the first crisis of deeper Venus-Pluto story. and the chance, if we stay rooted, for something in us to be renewed. So this week, in summary, is asking us to stay close to what is real. We're being called to return to our bodies, to value and self-possession. It's that quiet intelligence of Venus in Taurus that's calling us back this week. We're also, with the full moon in Libra, being shown where we've lost balance, or where beauty is not superficial but has a depth of truth beneath it. And we can look where reciprocity needs to be restored. And when we get Pluto intensifying this field, the key is not to collapse into fear, control, obsession, but let our desires deepen without losing our integrity. It's a week of Venus being tested almost, but it's also her strengthening. It's a chance to discover what is truly precious to us, and what is beyond superficial or fake, and what kind of love can survive contact with shadow and return more honest, rooted and whole. This is what I had for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Please drop a comment below, like, subscribe. If you want a reading, nip over to soulsymbols.co.uk and book one. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.